and they had a prophet guy come in there, and he said, too, if we left the church, we would be cursed. And so then me and my brother were like, yeah, we're going to take our chances.
Welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast. I'm so thrilled to bring you my guest today, Jon McCray of the What Do You Meme YouTube channel. This is one of my favorite YouTube channels that you definitely have to check out. He talks about theological topics. He does cultural commentary, great apologetics, critical thinking. So check out the What Do You Meme YouTube channel. Jon, I'm so glad to have you on with me today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Well, I want to introduce my viewers who may not be familiar with you yet a little bit to just give us a little picture of who you are and what you do. I know that you're not just a very successful YouTuber, but what else do you do? And tell us about your family and your life.
Yeah. So my name's Jon, and I started my YouTube channel I think it was actually 3 years ago in December. And but prior to that, I did a lot of debates with atheists online. And so eventually, long story short, I ended up starting a YouTube channel and then started doing a lot of atheist responses. And lately, it's kind of more morphed into a lot of cultural type stuff. So I want to kind of give like a thoughtful Christian perspective to the things that are going on in culture. So yeah, so that's kind of what I do. I have a wife and 2 kids and one on the way. And so a blessed man.
Blessed and busy. Blessed and busy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you did not grow up in the church, which is a very interesting part of your backstory, because a lot of apologists, you hear kind of a similar story. They grew up in church, their faith was challenged, they discovered apologetics and went into that. But you didn't actually come from that world. Tell us a little bit about your backstory, and then about maybe the first church experience that you had, because I know that had a significant impact on you, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't grow up in like a church going home or anything like that. My parents never even talked about like God or Christianity, hardly ever. Like my mom would say stuff sometimes though. She would say stuff like, kind of like pray to get something, I mean, that sort of thing. But it was very rare. We never had any conversations about God or anything like that. Then when I was 15, my aunt introduced me to church for the first time. And so I went to a church with her. And it was such a bizarre experience for me in a lot of different ways, because I walked in and I saw these people that seemed to be really united on something that was greater than themselves. And that was really kind of appealing to me, because I just haven't seen anything like that. I mean, you see some people unite over like sports or something like that, but something like transcendent like that was really intriguing to me. Yeah. So I started going there, and I went there for about a year. And the longer I stayed there, the longer I kind of had more negative experiences. There was a lot of rules that they had. They would talk really bad about people who were outside of the church, like everybody's like this devil, and they would talk about these immoral things that these people would do. And it made me feel uncomfortable, because I realized that like a lot of the immoral things that they would talk about from these like wicked outsiders were things that I was like secretly doing. So it was like uncomfortable, because I was like, man, I can't be perfect. And they had so many rules, and it seemed like the rules would just get more and more and more. Each week I came to the youth group and stuff, there'd be more rules.
What were the rules like that you're talking about? Because it sounds like kind of this extreme version of legalism. Give us an
Yeah.
example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the more absurd ones now looking back on it, then I didn't think much of it, because, it's just kind of like, but one of the more extreme ones is that like, they were talking about how we shouldn't eat Lucky Charms, because about like lady luck, they used to saying that like lady luck, and then that's part of the cult. And therefore, if we eat Lucky Charms, we're partaking in the cult and stuff like that. So that's like one of the more extreme ones. Obviously, the big no-nos, don't drink, smoke, drugs, party, don't date, you know what I mean? So it's just like a lot of kind of more extreme type things, and some of the, things that most Christians accept, but they added a lot onto that as well.
Yeah. Wow. So what caused you to leave that church?
Yeah. So eventually, so I was kind of more agnostic, and then I was like believing. And then like, as the church kind of went on, I became a little bit more agnostic. And now when I look back to the people that I know that used to go to that church. Most of them are like agnostic or non-believers or
Yeah.
something like that now too. But yeah, so me and my brother decided, we're like, yeah, this is, it's not for us, you know what I mean? And it was just kind of weird. And it kept getting weirder and weirder with some of the stuff. To me, it was my perception. It was weirder and weirder with some of the supernatural type stuff. And they had a prophet guy come in there and he said, too, if we left the church, we would be cursed. And
Oh,
so then me and my brother were like, yeah, we're going to take our chances. And so we ended up leaving the church. Yeah.
wow. So how did you get from there? Because that seems like that's an experience that would sour a lot of people to even going back to any kind of a church. What was it in you that wanted to continue seeking, or was there something in you that wanted to continue seeking? How did you go from that place to finding a good church? And I don't know, I think you mentioned you maybe
Yeah.
were more agnostic at that time. So what led you to Christ essentially?
Yeah. So essentially, like, I found myself kind of in this weird spot where I was like, some days I was like, there's got to be something greater out there. And then other days I'd be like, yeah, there's nothing out there. We're all alone in this vast, empty universe.
Mm.
And so I would kind of oscillate a lot. And I'm not sure how many people relate to that, but for me, that was the case. I would oscillate a lot. And then eventually, I went to college and I was just starting at a community college. And I wanted to take a class on world religion, so that way I can just kind of think more about it because I always kind of found it intriguing. And then the world religion class was full, and so they're like, "Well, you can take a philosophy of religion class." And then so when I took the philosophy of religion class, I had no idea what philosophy was, but that was the first time I actually came across like intellectual reasons to believe in God in the first place. And then so from then on, I mean, I once I um, came across the Kalam cosmological argument, I mean, it just made sense to me. And it's still my favorite argument to this day. And I still think it's convincing. And I debated it for years with atheists. I've heard probably, I think, every objection to it, but I still
Right.
find it personally convincing. Yeah. And
Yes.
so that was put me on the path of believing in God.
Well, that's interesting that you would bring up the Kalam cosmological argument because even to this day, when I kind of wake up and think, are we all crazy? Like,
Yeah.
is this
Yeah.
real? Is this
Yeah.
right and true?
Yeah.
It's that one that
Yeah.
really just brings, like, when I kind of go back through all of my beliefs, I'm like, the buck stops there. And so, I know this really
Yeah.
isn't kind of part of our discussion today, but it might be helpful for
Yeah.
some viewers who are like, what are they talking about? This like big
Yeah.
words like kalam cosmo. Give us just sort of an overview of what that argument is, because like you, this is one that I found really convincing early in my journey of kind of going through doubt. And I just, I was kind of backing up from, okay, I'm not even going to worry about Christianity or Jesus until I know if I can have good reasons that God himself exists. And so this is an argument that it's not going to get you to, the truthfulness of Christianity per se, or, the resurrection of Jesus, but it gives such a strong argument for the existence of not just any kind of God, but, a personal being who is all powerful. And so give us a little bit of an overview of what that is for people who may be scratching their heads going, what is that?
Yeah, yeah, no problem. So the basic argument is, in a nutshell, it's just like everything that begins to exist has a cause. And then the second part of the argument is the universe began to exist. And by universe is defined there to mean all of time, space, and matter. And arguments are made from philosophy and from modern science and that sort of thing. And then so if everything that begins to exist has a cause and the universe has a cause, then that cause would, because it created all time, space, and matter, it would have to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And so that's kind of like it in a nutshell. But yeah, you get into deeper parts, of course, with the different premises and stuff, but that's the basic kind of idea.
So often people, when they hear that, their first thought is, okay, well, if the universe had to have a cause, well, then God has to have a cause. So who created God? How would you answer just kind of that first objection I'm sure comes to a lot of people's minds?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of different ways to answer that objection, but the basic idea is that like God was never. So the first premise says everything that begins to exist has a cause, and God didn't begin to exist, so therefore He wouldn't need a cause. And that's not really backwards reasoning. There's like different ways to kind of go about it, but one way to kind of think about it too is like, you have to get to a place where whatever created the universe would have to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. So therefore, that thing, because it's timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, then it didn't have a beginning. And so then you can say that that is the first cause. If that makes sense.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so that was a little fun kind of rabbit trail there on the cosmological
Yeah.
argument. So you came to the conclusion that was true, and you're realizing, okay, God exists. How did you get to Christianity from there?
Yeah. So after I became convinced that God existed, this is when I became intellectually convinced, because there was times when I would float in and out of it, but to become concretely like intellectually convinced, then I wanted to know if God was revealed in any of the other kind of religions today. And so like I went on this journey where I was going to every church I could find, and so I went to like, the Mormon church, the Jehovah Witness church. I even went to the Church of Scientology. I went to
Wow.
all of these different churches, and I would just go there and just keep asking people questions, And so like it was weird. I would just keep asking people like, why do you believe that your religion is true and not other religions? Because that's at core what I was trying to understand. Like, why one religion and not the other? And so long story short, I would in advance I'd go try to prepare a little bit in advance to kind of get an idea of what they believed in stuff. And I stumbled across the evidence for the resurrection. And then
Mm.
that's when I started going down this kind of rabbit trail of like looking at all this evidence and stuff and trying to make it make sense, to explain it away, outside of God.
Mm.
And so it's like, so if we have these core facts that historians typically agree on, what's the best hypothesis that explains these facts, without it being ad hoc or something like that, without trying to find a way for it to in other words, just try not to find like a make up a reason in order to reject it. So anyways, by doing that, I just couldn't think of anything else. I genuinely couldn't. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it too, read a lot of different objections. And I said, none of this other stuff really makes sense. It doesn't really explain these facts. And so then that's when I became where I came to a point where I intellectually started being convinced that Christianity was true. And then after that, I started debating in order to kind of solidify, kind of check my points and stuff to see like what I was missing and if I really
Yeah,
believed it and that sort of thing. So yeah.
very cool. So then at some point you decide Christianity is true. What was the moment for you when you were just like, I'm all in, I'm giving my life to Christ? Was there a church involved
Yeah.
with that, or was that something that just happened on your own? And then, did you eventually find churches that were a little bit less kind of, out there than that first church that you had found?
Yeah. So that was for me, it was more of like a journey as well, too. Like during this time when I was doing a lot of the debates and stuff, that's when the belief for me really started to solidify. And like everybody else too, you have these points of doubt where you're just like, like kind of how you said, you're like, is this really true? Are we just deceiving ourselves? Or,
Hmm.
what I mean? What's going on? But I honestly, genuinely at that time too, like during this process, I didn't care if Christianity was true or false. I just wanted to know what was true eventually. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that was really where and a lot of like debating with the atheists and stuff online and taking my time to really research, what I mean, all these different points and reading all these books and all these things, is where it really started to kind of solidify for me more and more. It wasn't until I internalized the gospel message that's when my life, I feel like, really began to change a lot more. But that was a process as well of really battling through the scriptures, trying to study and figure out like what this really says, then understanding God's grace, internalizing that more and more is what really led to like a personal change for me.
Yeah, and I think that when I watch, I spent quite a bit of time even this morning. I love watching your videos, and so just because I knew we were going to be talking today, I just watched a few of them this morning. And one of the things that really strikes me about you is how eloquent you are at describing grace. You are so gifted at helping people understand what grace is, and I'd love to have you maybe just give a basic definition of grace, and then I want to take
Yeah.
that and kind of compare that with what I think a lot of maybe people that don't understand grace might think about it, or they might recharacterize it, or think wrongly about it. But what is, in just the most simplest terms, what is grace, which is really the core message of the gospel?
Yeah, absolutely. Grace it's an unmerited gift, an unearned gift, right? So Paul makes this distinction in Romans 3, I think 4 through 5, where he says like it's better for you not to work because if you work, or actually, I'm sorry, let's go to Romans 11:6 instead. So Romans 11:6, where Paul makes a distinction there, where he says, if it's by works, it's no longer grace. He says, if it's grace, it's a free gift. Is paraphrasing here. If it's grace, it's a free gift, and therefore, if you add works, it's no longer grace the moment you add works. So if I give you a gift and then you pay me for it, that's not a gift. That's a paycheck. That's the point
Mm-hmm.
Paul makes in Romans 4:4 or 3:4,
Yeah.
one of which. But he's like, yeah, that's called a paycheck, right? So if you earn it, it's a paycheck. But we have this where Jesus comes into our world, right? God puts on human flesh, comes into our world, and dies in our place, so that way we can be seen with the righteousness of Christ, rather than us being seen by our righteousness, which is filthy rags, according to the Bible.
Mm.
So we have this imputed righteousness, is what the word is called. We have this imputed righteousness on us, where we're seen as if we did everything right, and then Christ gives us that gift, so that way we can be seen as if we did everything right before the Father. So yeah, so the basic idea of grace is just that it's an undeserved gift, and that's drastically different than we see in any other religion.
And it's drastically different from what we see in even a lot of people giving messages that are marketed as Christian. I think that
Yeah,
sometimes we hear people saying, "Well, if you do this, God will do this.
yeah,
If you pray enough, if you're good enough, if you, are pious enough and committed enough and obedient enough, God will love you more, or He will give you all these blessings. If you really commit your life to Christ, He's going to bless you with, a beautiful home and cars and things. I mean, this is kind of what the seeds of the prosperity gospel are. And you talked in one of your videos about a term that I hear all the time in progressive Christianity in particular, and that's this reference to something called the transactional gospel. Now, I've actually heard this phrase defined a couple of different ways. One way they'll use it is to say kind of what you were responding to in the video commentary you did on the viral video of Lisa Gungor talking about their story of pastoring a mega church, and everybody can find that on YouTube. It's easy to find that. But she was basically saying that, like, her faith was really rattled when she saw a lot of suffering in the world, or when I think it was her cousin that wasn't healed after everybody had prayed so hard. And I've heard story after story from people who ended up going into the progressive Christian kind of mindset because they were told that, God will answer all your prayers if you have enough faith, or He will bless you with healing and health and wealth if you do all these, X, Y, Z, whatever it may be. And so she became disillusioned by that. And so she says that's a transactional gospel. And so I think there's something in her that reacted against that rightly. She's like, that can't be right. But the sad thing is that often they'll throw the gospel out with it. But I wonder if and then the other, well, I'll say the other one. So the other way that they'll refer to the transactional gospel is sort of a mischaracterization of substitutionary atonement. So they'll say, so many Christians think that all they have to do is just get their little get out of hell free card because Jesus made this transaction, and that's the transactional gospel. So we can maybe talk about both of those in turn, but comment if you would on that first version, because you did that so well in the video you made, and we'll even in the podcast notes and everything link to that video so people can watch that as well. But comment on that transactional gospel that Lisa Gungor was talking about in her video.
yeah. So, and this is common too, just like you said, it's kind of a common conception that a lot of Christians may have for one way or for one reason or another. But deep down, most people, I think, because the world is constructed this way, we think that we have to earn everything that we get, right? So if you're going to get a diploma, you have to work really hard. You're going to get this job, you earn it, with these credentials, that sort of thing. So this is kind of a common misunderstanding. Now, on the one end of it, it leads to shame, right? Just like it was in the Lisa Gungor situation, where they felt like they were doing everything right and things were still going wrong in their lives. And then, so like, what's the conclusion there? That either I'm more messed up or God doesn't exist. That's kind of the logical conclusion there, if you believe that it is a transaction where it's all about putting in so that way you can get back. But on the other end too, it leads to I think ultimately it would lead to selfishness as well, because then when it comes to salvation and all these things, you're doing these things so that way you can be saved. It's not, you're not doing them necessarily, or I guess fully, because you're trying to help other people necessarily, or you're trying to just please God. Instead you're doing it because you want to save your own butt, right? And so in the end, the it looks like it's moral, but in the end, it actually becomes immoral because you're being trained for selfishness. Now, in Christianity, if you believe that that you're saved because of what Christ did, and He gives this to you as a gift that you accept, then you're already accepted. So now you can start doing the good things and the right things for the right reasons. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because you want to honor God and you want to love others, and all of those type of reasons. And so it takes away that kind of selfish nature where you're just trying to earn salvation, because that's not, if you have salvation already, then the cup is clean from the inside, as Jesus would say. So that's what I think is the problem there. Now, on the other end, to go to your second question, does this mean that this is just a license to be lazy or license to sin? And I think that progressives probably rightly complain, I would assume, at Christians who say, okay, I'm saved, I don't have to do anything in the world now. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's the right complaint, because if we now our life after we're saved is about loving our neighbors and honoring God, right? And so we don't honor God or love our neighbors when we're just like being lazy and not trying to like do something, you know what I mean, in
Yeah.
the world, that sort of thing. But the misconception is thinking that merits salvation, which I think that the gospel clearly states you don't merit salvation by being moral or trying to be moral, or doing these things in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this is something that I've seen, that a misunderstanding of grace is at the root of so many false teachings and false gospels, because it can take on different forms, it can take on different language, but at the core it's this misunderstanding of grace. And often what we see in the progressive church, sadly, is they leave one form of sort of that moralism for another. They might rightly recognize, hey, I can't earn my salvation, I can't ever be good enough, but then, of course, in the progressive church, the gospel almost becomes like this, like social justice warriors and things like that. And so it almost becomes moralism on the other side of things, which is kind of sad because often they're trading one for the other. But often I see also this sort of charge about this transactional type of gospel in reference to Jesus dying on the cross. Like, to them, it's a cheap way to go about looking at atonement. It's like, oh, Jesus died on the cross. All you have to do is put your trust in Him and you're saved. And kind of like what you were hinting at, the result of even the other kind of transactional gospel, it ends up with, well, you just can do whatever you want. Well, that can't be right. And so I think it's interesting to note that in the gospel, in the core of the gospel, with this atonement that Jesus achieved on the cross, there is a transaction there. It's His life for mine. It's not only a transaction, though. It's like, if we think about so many other things in our lives, even a marriage relationship, there are transactions that happen, but it's not just a transaction. And so there's so much more. There's love, and there's relationship, and there's care and growth and all of these things. And so I think that's an interesting way. It's interesting that word keeps coming up, transactional. And I think both of those seem to be rooted in a misunderstanding of grace. And I love an analogy you gave in one of your videos. I wonder if you can share it with us, where you talk about an atheist who stands before God, final judgment. He's died, and he's kind of complaining because, and I may be getting this wrong, but he's complaining because he says, well, I never had a chance to read the Bible. And so you're going to hold me accountable to the morals that are in the Bible. And I love the way you kind of describe God's response in this metaphor. I wonder if you could share it with us.
Yeah, no problem. So that kind of idea for that metaphor, I believe, comes from like Romans 1 and 2, particularly, maybe some of 3. But anyways, like the idea there is like the atheist that dies, or just whoever it is dies. And then they're like, what, God, well, this isn't fair that I'm going to be judged based off of the 10 commandments in a book that I didn't even read or that I didn't believe in while on earth. And then God says to him, well, okay, I won't judge you based off of the standards that you didn't believe in when you were on earth. I'll just judge you by your standards. And so God pulls out this like tape recorder and then plays back all of the times where you said that people shouldn't do anything, all the things you got morally outraged about in life. You say, oh, you shouldn't judge other people, or you shouldn't tell other people what to think, or any of the things that you say to people over and over, right? So any of those things that you say, God took a list, and then He's just like, okay, I'll hold you accountable to these things. Now, how do you think you did? And the truth is, like, if we're pretty like introspective and reflective, we'll realize that like we're always failing even on our own standards. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
like the way I think about it is like kind of like how Paul makes arguments in Romans 1 and 2, where he's like, these people who believe that they want to be judged by the law. Okay, you'll be judged by the law, but you're going to fail, you know? And then he goes to these different scenarios, and no matter how you dice it, you're going to fail on these things because you can't even live up to your own standards. And so the point of that is to show people that like there's a problem, and if you don't believe there's a problem, then you don't need to be saved, right? You know, but if you see that there's a problem that even according to your own standards you'll be condemned by, then you'll start realizing that like you need something other than yourself in order to you know, to not be condemned by those standards.
Yeah, it was such a helpful metaphor. As I was listening to that, I was like, man, that's so well put. Because it's like it takes away all the ammunition to say, well, I didn't know, or I never heard, or something along those lines. So you've done some research into deconstruction, and I'm kind of swinging around to get to, you made this really popular post about progressive Christianity, and but I want to start by talking about, you did some research into deconstruction. What were some insights you gleaned from doing some of that research?
Yeah. So there's a couple things, but one of the main things that jumped out at me as I was reading the reasons why people deconverted was the fact that so many people deconverted behind these assumptions that weren't even biblical in the first place. They're kind of just like these things that they've heard in church or that are assumed in culture or something like that, but they weren't biblical assumptions. So like the you know, one of the main assumptions is kind of what we touched on earlier, is where people believe that if I do these good things, then God is going to bless me. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so my life is going to be good. If I convert to Christianity, then life is going to be good. And to be fair, I mean, I know that came a lot from some people who do evangelism and missionary type stuff. You know, sometimes they'll say that, where you want your life to be great, you know, come to Christianity. But it's kind of weird because when I read the Bible, I didn't have those same assumptions, because I was like, man, the people who went to converted to Christianity and stuff, and the people who followed Christ, and you know, anybody probably that you can think of in the Bible, for the most part, had a pretty rough time. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Even the greatest man to ever live, obviously Jesus, God in the flesh, he suffered in this world too. You know what I mean? And so like my assumption wasn't there, but I realized that most people, it seemed like, had some sort of assumption that you know, their life is going to be great just because they're saved. And we're just not promised that, I don't think, because Jesus even said, in this life, you will have these trials and tribulations. So we're to expect the opposite. So that was one of the big ones, because in one way or another, people would always be saying that in their stories, like,
Yeah.
you know, why, you know, I converted and then these bad things still happened in my life, you know. So that was one of the big ones.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's a lot more, but don't know
Yeah.
if you want to go into those or not. But
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I would like to hear a little more about it, because just in my experience of listening to different deconstruction stories and listening to podcasts where people are either in the process of deconstruction or fully deconstructed, and now I've noticed, even in just the last maybe month, there are several platforms that are actually offering to help you deconstruct, like come, we'll help you deconstruct, we'll guide you through your deconstruction process. And so this is a huge thing right now in culture. It's a huge thing for people who have had experiences with the church that were negative in some way. Like you mentioned, they didn't get what they thought they were going to get from it. And in my book, I lay out a few of those reasons. One of those is that problem of trying to reconcile the bad things they see in the world with us saying that God is good. Other reasons would be kind of what you described in your church background, that first church you went to, where hyper legalism, where they were adding things to scripture. You mentioned that you were told Lucky Charms was somehow demonic because there was occultic symbols in it or something along those lines. And I know people, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, because there's a couple people in my life who were told, even as children, if you wear shorts, you're not going to go to heaven. Or if the rapture happens and you're in a bowling alley or a movie theater, you're not going to happen. I know people that weren't even allowed to go inside of a movie theater because it was demonic inside of there or something along those lines. And so I think that there are reasons like that. Of course, people go through abusive situations. There's all kinds of reasons, but the sort of common thread is that it seems to be just this negative experience they had in church. And so in your research, you've found the one that's sort of not getting what you were promised, or maybe even questioning the moral character of God because he seems to say this is going to happen if you do this, and then it didn't happen. What were some other things you found in your research?
Yeah, no, that was all good too. And this is why I think it kind of ties back to doctrine as well too, because when people don't have a clear idea of why we're saved, this is why grace is so important.
Mm.
If you don't know why we're saved, then it's like everything else becomes like up for grabs. So like people will add in these works and stuff like this, and whatever kind of works they think that don't condemn them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That they feel like they can say other people are wrong for, these people are going to hell because they, whatever, vote this way, or because they dress this way, or yeah, I mean, you've heard it all. And the reason why is because as soon as we add works into the gospel, then the gospel instantly gets confusing. And
Mm.
then everybody has this different set, and everybody's just competing against like, well, these works, you know what I mean? Well, my
Yeah.
works. And then they're just arguing about where to place them, and then what kind of works and how many, that sort of thing too. So anyways, I think that like in these experiences like this too, a lot of people are hurt from the experience they had because they felt like they were let down. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because like they had these expectations that things are going to be this way, and then they feel they how the system is made when it is that transaction thing. Then it makes them feel bad when things go wrong, and they feel like they're the problem
Hmm.
because things are going wrong in life, and so it kind of solidifies that kind of um, hurt. And then the people who are there to try to help them and fix them typically aren't the church, right? Because the
Hmm.
church has the assumption, this happened in the Lisa Gungar situation where the church had the same assumption. They're like, what are you guys doing while you
Yeah.
guys keep getting these bad things happen in your life? So they can't go to the people in church. So the only people who understand, they feel like the people who understand are going to be the people who are outside the church, usually the atheist agnostics, or the people who just want to help them deconvert
Hmm.
for or deconstruct for whatever reason. So
And it seems like, in progressive Christianity, it's people who there's something inside them that wants to hang on to Jesus.
right,
It's like they've had this bad experience, but there's a reason. Even I was really kind of touched reading Lisa's book and hearing her journey going all the way to where I think she declared atheism for a day, but there was
right,
something in her that is still like, I want to know Jesus. I know there's more. And so I actually, I pray for people because I think that there's something in them that knows that God is real. They know that Jesus is the way. They've a lot of times redefined Jesus to look a lot like themselves, which is, I think we all have the tendency to do that. But yeah, and this kind of brings it back around to the prosperity gospel, because I've known people who, maybe got sick and they prayed and believed with all their heart that they were going to be healed. And they were told, this means you don't have enough faith. This means, and so it's always on you. It's more work to be done. And I think that is such a setup for people to end up deconstructing to humanism, atheism, agnosticism, or some version of progressive Christianity. And which is why your story is so intriguing, because you had, I think that on the spectrum of unusual and kind of negative church experiences, everybody's had a bad church experience. If you've grown up in
right, yeah,
church,
yeah,
you've had a stinker
yeah,
pastor somewhere, you've had a bad, something. But yours kind of, it's like in the uniquely, like Lucky Charms being a sin is kind of on the far end of the spectrum of kind of a negative experience. So it seems like you had the perfect setup to kind of just leave that
yeah.
and go, psh, that's all junk. I'm not even into this Jesus or Christian thing. Why do you think that wasn't the case for you?
Well, it kind of was the case. Like after
Okay.
we left that church, like both of us kind of went more agnostic, and my brother, he's still agnostic, probably leaning. Yeah, some actually I don't know. He's probably leaning more away from atheism now. But anyways, that's what happens typically in these sorts of churches. So what happened for me was like, and I really was on this kind of truth seeking journey or truth seeking journey too. But eventually, like that's why it was kind of like I want to say it's like a miracle that I got in the philosophy of religion classes, because this actually helped me know that like I can know this. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And so like being able to say like, okay, now I can know this is true one way or another, because I didn't care wherever the chips fell. I just wanted them to fall somewhere. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
But like saying that, okay, now I feel, I can come to this kind of settlement in my mind, felt really good, because I'm a skeptic too. So like I relate to like obviously a lot of the atheist stuff because of the experiences and the skepticism. But being skeptical and stuff like that, it took a lot of skepticism, but I still believe that, like, this just makes the most sense. But so it started there, but yeah, eventually too is like, when I did come across um, the progressive Christianity type stuff, what I came to think about was like, I don't want to accept something because it makes me feel good, right?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because I see people doing this all the time, and that's what helped is I saw people doing this all the time, and particularly I want to say in like a postmodern culture, which I
Hmm.
think that we're in a culture that's more postmodern. Um, Most people, the way that they come to know what's true and what's not true is based off of how they feel or their personal experiences, right? And so when that's the case, when it's like, especially if it's somebody's personal experience, like, I'm all for, you can have personal experiences, that sort of thing, but I don't know if it was God. I don't know if it was you. I don't know if it was the devil. I don't know what the origin of your experience was per se. So we have to have something additional to be able to say, like, does this correspond with um, external reality, not just in my mind, but the rest of reality as well. Because I think when Jesus was convincing people and stuff too, these miracles weren't just in people's internal subconscious. There was miracles that were external that other people could see and stuff as
Mm.
well too. And the resurrection you can verify as well too. Is
Yeah.
verifiable. So, but anyways, I think from that I realized that, like, at least from what I understand about progressive Christianity and the progressive Christians I've talked to and that sort of thing, is that they have a lot of views that tend to coincide with the postmodern aspect of things. So, like, even basing everything off of love, that's great, but love is not a feeling biblically, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And so, like, we have this agape love where it's a commitment rather than a feeling. And so that drastically changes things, because a lot of times when I hear them say love, they're talking about inclusiveness and stuff like this, like accepting everybody and stuff because of love. But in reality, it's like this conception of love that is so postmodernized that it doesn't really represent the biblical account of love. Now, don't get me wrong, like, loving people, or making people feel good is a good thing a lot of times. So sometimes it's not a good thing, in
Mm.
cases where a child, my child would be happy if I let them eat, ice cream for every meal.
Yeah.
You know what I
Or
mean?
do
But that's not
screens
loving.
all day long. They would be so happy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So you'd feel very good for a little while at least, but that's the thing, is we want to do what's best for the person. That's what loving really entails, is doing what's best for this person. And that's not just in the short run, it's for the long run as well. So anyway, so yeah, when it comes to the progressive Christianity, I think that there's a lot of these kind of assumptions that, like, we come to know things based off of how we feel. We can choose to, and by the way, I know I'm speaking broadly here, because I know there's people who
Sure. Yeah.
disagree within progressive Christianity, but they'll say, like, yeah, we can, I don't like what Paul said about this, so
Hmm.
therefore, it can't be inspired, and that's like the exact wrong way to come to your conclusions about God, right? Because if
Yeah.
God can't contradict you, if your God's not big enough to contradict you and what you think, then you have a God that's too small, and a God that's not really a God at all. It's really you. It's not
Hmm.
God, it's just you and your views, version of what you're creating, what you want God to be like.
Yeah. And it sounds to me, even hearing you talk, it's like it sounds like for you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it sounds like you weren't satisfied with basically believing that truth is subjective, that
Yeah.
it's relative. Because it's like, as I study the movement of progressive Christianity, and not just to harp on that, but just look at different worldviews, the way people see the world, it seems like there's a lot of different specific worldviews, but they're really at the core bottom of it is like two. In fact, I think there was this video
Yeah.
I watched with Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and a pastor, where they were talking about it like reality tunnels. It's like we're not even in the same reality tunnel sometimes, because you have this on one side of things, people saying, like, I think is what you're saying, is that you knew that there was truth. You knew that something could be known. There was something out there that was true about reality that you could know enough about to at least let the chips fall somewhere. And you
Yeah.
wanted to know what that was, whether you like wanted to believe it or not. So you have like that side of things, and then there's the side of things, I think, where people just sort of accept relativism as the default position. And that's what I see a lot in movements like this, is they'll, even these new kind of platforms I've seen in the last month or two, where people are saying, hey, they're operating under the presupposition that relativism is true. Whatever's true for you is true. I'll guide you through this journey to deconstruct from this construct of truth you were given, and you can create. Basically, I think what they're saying is you can kind of create your own reality, because they're not going to challenge you on truth claims that you make. So they're going to guide you through. But the fundamental assumption underneath that is that truth is not objective, that you can create that your own reality tunnel. And that, I think that's a dangerous viewpoint to have. And so for people listening, give us, I know you talk a lot about truth on your YouTube channel. Talk about the differences between subjective truth, what we might call relativism, and then the opposite view, which is objective truth, where we believe that there is something about reality that is true or false. Like, if you believe the false thing, you're actually wrong, which, of course, in postmodernism makes you hateful and bigoted and all that. That's why I think we keep going around in circles. But I wonder if you'd comment on that a little bit.
Yeah. So subjective truth basically means that it's dependent on human psychology, right? So it depends on, so like if I like chocolate or vanilla, that it's true if I like vanilla more than chocolate, or chocolate more than vanilla, whatever. It's true for me that that's the case, but that doesn't mean that it's true for everyone else. And so so basically the idea is more psychological rather than external, right? And so if it's objective truth, what that means is that it's independent of human psychology, still true. So this water bottle exists whether you can see it or not. It's still on my desk right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what something objective is. Now, when it comes to what you said, I think you made a good point, because what I find, and I try to dig up this in videos a lot too, but what I find is that these assumptions, these kind of, the postmodern assumptions where culture's at right now are just assumed. They're axiomatic, which means they're not even argued for. They're just assumed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so because the assumption is that truth is, the assumption for most people today is that truth is actually just purely psychological, then it follows naturally where you can come to all of these different conclusions, even that you see in politics and everything else, you can come to all these different conclusions because how people feel determines what's true. Then if that's the case, then nobody's going to even challenge that, because they don't even stop to even think like, is that assumption true? Because it's so accepted, it's like asking a fish what water's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so accepted that like no questioning it. And so what we see today is a lot of things that are being built off of these assumptions, and people don't even have the tools or the ability, or even the question, even start to question if these assumptions are true. And so because some of the assumptions are things like you have to look inside to see who you really are. How you feel inside determines who you really are, and you shouldn't let anybody tell you how to live your life. Because in the end, you need to look out for yourself, and not let anybody tell you different. And don't let anybody try to change you. And I mean, all of these sorts of things. There's so many of them too,
Mm-hmm.
but all of these things are just assumed. And then so that's why it's easy for progressive Christianity to take off in a postmodern culture, because it wouldn't take off in a culture that's not postmodern. It just wouldn't, because those assumptions aren't shared there. And so I think that's what is a big issue, is when we base the gospel off of these culture assumptions, then we've actually kind of missed the main. It's easy for us, in other words, to miss the main core message of the gospel, because all of these definitions have changed and all of these assumptions are there. So I think that, by the way, there's a book called Misreading the Scripture Through Modern Eyes, I think it was, that kind of goes through some of these Western assumptions that we have too. So I think that can help some people who are watching as well too. But that's what I want to say is what's going on, and why progressive Christianity is just assumed to kind of work with some people.
So what do you think is, I want to, it's the big question. I want to say, what do you think is the solution when you're talking with somebody who may not even realize that they've assumed this worldview of relativism? They're not really operating in the reality tunnel of objective truth. And of course, it's easy to see how you can create a God in your own image when you're doing that. You can slap the label Jesus on whatever kind of behavior you would do, or what judgment you would make, or thing that you would teach, you can put the Jesus label on that, because that Jesus becomes sort of this catch-all phrase for everything that you have decided is good and true for you. What do you
Yeah.
think is the best way to go about trying to open people's eyes to some of this? Because I think like when we're both,
Yeah.
when you and I, we could disagree on something. I'm sure there's lots we disagree on, but we both are
Right.
operating from the assumption that truth means something, that truth is telling
Right.
it, what you say. If you're speaking the truth, what you say corresponds with reality. And I could be wrong
Yeah.
about that on a certain point. You could be wrong on that on a certain point. But I feel like the conversation's easier to have because we both sort of agree on that fundamental principle that somebody can actually be wrong in this conversation.
Right.
So
Right.
how do we sort of open people's eyes to maybe an assumption they've made about the nature of truth that might be actually not truth?
No, yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that doesn't work is just to tell them objective truth matters, right? Because
Yeah.
that just doesn't work. It's not convincing because from their perspective, how they come to know what's true or not comes from how they feel inside or their experiences, that sort of thing, right? Or how even if they can relate to how other people feel, then they can say something true, you know. But if they can't relate to how those other people feel, then and it I don't want to get too deep down that way, but anyways. So to answer your question, I think that the best way to deal with it is that you have to show them the inconsistency within things that are very important to them. So take two things. So kind of take the things that are important to them on an emotional level, which they have every desire to want to maintain, and then you want to show them how those are incompatible or it leads to undesirable conclusions. Because only then in this sort of like existential crisis that they'll have internally, only then will they begin to listen to you. And I found this in life over and over because you can try to reason with people in these ways where you have this like, I'm following the laws of logic here, you know, and all these
Yeah.
sorts of things. But they're operating off of an entirely different set of assumptions. So you have to work within those assumptions first before you can start moving them over to a different set of assumptions.
Yeah.
So, like, and I didn't mention this earlier, but like for me, kind of going through a lot of stuff, one of the main reasons to that helped me not accept this kind of postmodernized Christianity or progressive Christianity was because I realized that I didn't like the fact that all of these other people were saying the same sorts of things, and I didn't like their conclusions that they derived from it. You know, so like for example, if a Muslim says that, hey, I had, you know, so based off of my experiences, you know, I should become a terrorist, right? You're like, I don't like that conclusion, but if I have the same set of rules, then it's not fair for me to say, hey, you can't do that, but I can. You know, it's not fair.
Hmm.
So that was kind of the thing is like, I didn't want to accept a lot of the stuff that people were saying too. And that's what kind of pushed me to start looking at things more objectively too. Because then it's like, that's kind of that motivation. And I think that's the case with a lot of people. So I think what you want to do is you want to listen to where they're coming from. You don't want to just shut it down right away, of course, because these things are obviously true to them. It's going to take time for you to try to unpack this. So work within that, because this is what I see Paul doing and Jesus doing over and over in the Bible. They work with where people already are, and then they'll show them how that doesn't lead to a favorable outcome for them. And so
Hmm.
that's like Sermon on the Mount, right? Oh, you
Yeah.
guys think you're good because you haven't cheated on your wife? Well, have you looked at a woman with lust? Okay, you committed adultery in your heart. You still broke the law, you know? And so like
Yeah.
he's taking what's important to them and then showing them how it doesn't work in their favor. And then, so that's what I try to do a lot of on my channel as well.
That's good stuff. And people can learn more by going to the What Do You Meme YouTube channel. So many great videos. Uh, Jon has posted he's a prolific YouTube content creator. So there's tons of videos on there. We're going to continue this conversation in the Patreon only subscriber portion. So if you don't know what that is, you can go to patreon.com/Alisa Childers. You can look at the different tiers. If you select tier 2, you're going to get early access to my full length podcasts. If you select I believe it's tier 3, you get to be a part of a private Facebook group where you get to ask the questions that I ask our guests for our bonus content. Of course, tier 4 will give you that bonus content. Tier 5 will give you all of those things I already mentioned, but you're also going to get an autographed copy of my new book, Another Gospel, plus a couple other goodies throughout the year. So definitely check out patreon.com/Alisa Childers if you haven't already. Jon, as we close out this final portion of this segment here. So for people who might be watching, how would you encourage them in their faith, particularly young people? I'm thinking who have so many of these preconceived ideas about church, and some of them might even be true. They might have had a bad church experience. What would be your advice for them today?
Yeah, no, I'd say that you most likely, like we said earlier, you most likely probably had some sort of negative experiences with people or with the church, Christians, and that sort of thing. But I want to encourage you that the truth of Christianity actually shows that we should expect that, because Christianity says that we're all sinners and we're all have this selfish nature where we want to elevate ourselves, which is why we look down on other people for things that they do, but we don't look down on ourselves for the things that we do. We have this natural tendency to want to do that. And so that doesn't say anything about the truth of Christianity. Instead, I think it just confirms the truth of Christianity, where people are sinners and we're all hypocrites and messed up in these different ways. And that's why we need a savior. So I think that understanding that problem first is what helps you to find the right solution to that problem. So hope that helps.
That's good stuff. Well, I want to thank my guest, Jon McCray, for joining us on the podcast today. You can go to his YouTube channel, What Do You Meme? It's awesome. Check it out. If you are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified every time we release a new video. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, it really helps us out if you leave us a great review. It helps get the message into the hands of more people, and we're so thankful for you, and we will see you next time.